Hello guys, this is the third time I'm having to do this because the first time my posture was so bad that I couldn't deal with it. The second time it didn't record, and this never happened before. So this time I guess you're getting my third draft of my thoughts, so it's gonna be a lot less chaotic than it was before. But let's go. Okay, Dancing on the Edge of the World. I'm almost done. This book is so good. But anyways, the articles I read this week. First article was on, it was really good. It was on the book Neuromancer, which was a science fiction cyberpunk book in the 80s that like invented the subgenre. Not my kind of book, wouldn't read it, but it was about like the state of science fiction in the 80s and like the corporatization and the mergers and how the community was like very against that because science fiction, the ideals and existence of it doesn't really match up with, capitalism. Just like feminism and feminist publishing, there's a little bit of a connection there, a little bit of a comparison to be made. But basically, the science fiction community was like dragged kicking and screaming into the mainstream in the 80s. They didn't like that because they always viewed themselves as like a subcultural group, as like a underdog kind of mentality, very insular, didn't want to let people in, and that got me thinking, and I've like really been thinking about the like origins of science fiction in terms of the fact that like fan and author and writer, I'm also talking about fantasy. Sorry, tangent. I don't really see the point in separating the two. I don't really see the point in trying to define either. Sci-fi, fantasy, a lot of the times you read a book and you can't tell which one it is. Be honest. But, so, anyways, I digress. And I forgot my train of thought. Whatever I was saying before, the community being super insular from the beginning, being really like not into letting people in unless they prove themselves to be, like really deep in this shit, and as a result, women and people of color to the back, you guys aren't allowed in, and how there was always from the very, very beginning of science fiction like a disparity between how the audience and who was actually reading it, like the audience, the publishers and the editors had in mind, and who was actually reading it was always totally not the same. Like there were always two different people, and I think that categories of people, and I think that is still true today. I think there is a disparity between the perceived audience and the actual audience for science fiction and fantasy. I promise I was way more articulate in the other versions I did of this. But this article is really cool. It was written by some prof from Carleton. Why there's so many Canadians doing this kind of stuff, I don't know. Like, maybe that's a good thing for me, but it just seems random. And then as I was reading this book, we got to, you'd think I would have bookmarked it after doing this 3 times, but I didn't, so I have to try and find it every single time. It's like, I read this response from Ursula Guin that she published in like a magazine. Someone was asking her about the state of science fiction in the 1980s. Right after I read that article, I read this. And that was really cool. And I was like, wow, making connections. But basically she was like, you guys need to stop being so annoying about control and responsibility and power and all this stuff. Like, shut up and start writing. And she was right. But I loved this article, the one about Neuromancer, because it really like was a good example of what I want to do with my thesis. And how like using the book, and like the book is about like fighting the system and capitalism and all that stuff, is like a reflection of like what was going on in science fiction publishing in the 80s. The other article I read was on the women's press science fiction list, but list meaning series. I'm trying to figure out if that's just like a British equivalent, because list is not what it was. It was like a series of published books by the Women's Press in science fiction. It was like their science fiction series, and how they like established the feminist science fiction canon through these books that they published in like a brief span again in the 80s. And the article had a lot of like quotes, as in like she interviewed the people who made the list, and Ursula Guin was also quoted in it being like, I wish I published with you guys, but I didn't. So, you know, again, making connections. This article was published in 2022. Tell me why I just found it. It's the struggle of finding articles in this. It's not like they're not out there. Sometimes it's just, you gotta dig. I was deep in the Brouillette operations trying to find these, and I found this article, and I was like, so why didn't I find this when I was doing all the searches before? And on that matter, I found the other article, the one about Neuromancer, by just looking at the book history journal, seeing how many book articles had been published on science fiction. Guess how many? 3. I've read all of them now. 3 books about science fiction in the book history journal. So again, science fiction, even though it's mainstream, it is still not appreciated as a legitimate genre of literature. Guin talks about it a lot. She talks about it a lot in here. But case in point, I was science. My friends, we were talking about the New York Times list of 100 books of the 21st century. Worst list I've ever seen in my life. 99 books of those 100 books I would never read. Looked terribly boring and horribly pretentious. Not for me. I am here for dragons, ghosts, ghouls, cyborgs. To me, it's not a good book if it doesn't have those in it. And there's one science fiction, by N.K. Jemisin. I always forget her initials. Is it N.J. or N.K.? That's the only single book on the entire list I have ever had the intention of reading. And it's the only science fiction book. So what do you know? She's still right. You guys are still not giving science fiction its dues. I don't know if I want you to. It's a little too smart. It's a little too intelligent for most of you out here. So maybe you should stay with the smart people. Anyways, finally, I'm gonna turn on my AC again.